By now you've seen it 100 times on all forms of media, the slap heard around the world. Everybody is focusing on Chris Rock and Will Smith and how's he going to respond and is he going to apologize? Well, we know at this point Will Smith issued an apology, but what was the genesis of this whole thing? Where did Chris Rock's joke come from? And that's all around Jada Pinkett Smith. Now, Jada Smith has opened up about her battle with alopecia. She opened up in 2018 about struggling with alopecia. So today we're going to talk about her specific struggle with alopecia, and alopecia in general and how it affects individuals. Alopecia in and of itself is not a medical diagnosis. It's a generic, broad term, and it can mean many different things. So we're going to talk about all of the different types of alopecia, and we're going to talk about how it affects people emotionally. In 2018, Jada Pinkett Smith opened up about her battle with alopecia. Alopecia is a generic term that just means hair loss, and there's a lot of different types, and as someone who suffers with their own form of hair loss, I can tell you that there is a strong emotional reaction when you first start losing your hair. Overall, many times this is an easier journey for men than it is for women. Women much more identify with their hair socially. It's less acceptable for a woman to be losing her hair, and so Jada Pinkett Smith back at that time made the decision that she was going to start shaving her hair and just owning the fact that she was suffering from alopecia. This is a brave step, and I have to commend her for having the courage, the bravery to do that, and many women make that choice as well. But many women and men take steps to hide the fact that they have any form of alopecia, and that in and of itself can be quite a battle. I talked about that in my own struggle with alopecia on a previous video, which if you haven't watched, you should definitely check that out. When we look at Jada Pinkett Smith as she's showing off her hair loss, her talking about her alopecia, we can't really get a sense just by looking at her scalp in this video which type of hair loss she's experiencing. Now, the most common type of alopecia that men experience, and probably the most common type in women, is just simply androgenic alopecia. Androgenic alopecia refers to a hormone-type hair loss. For men and women, the circulating testosterone in the body can be converted to something called dihydrotestosterone by an enzyme that is present at the hair follicle called 5-alpha reductase. This DHT then induces a miniaturization of the hair follicle to where it gets smaller and smaller and eventually falls out. Over time, the hair follicle will no longer be functional and that hair loss will be permanent. There's many different types of interventions, and today's video is not going to go over all of the possible treatments for these diseases, but rather to just break down the different types of alopecia. Now, of course, with androgenic alopecia being among the most common types of hair loss, that could be something that Jada is experiencing, but I don't really think personally that that is the cause for her. And of course, I don't know anything about her family history, if her mom, grandma, any sisters that she may or may not have, if they have any type of alopecia. Of course, a strong family history would increase her risk for androgenic alopecia. Many people have speculated that she could be suffering from something called alopecia areata. I did a video on this on TikTok and Instagram where I talked about her with alopecia areata because I think it's a pretty plausible explanation. Now, alopecia areata can start as small circular patches of hair loss, usually affecting the scalp. And in many people, it's going to be self-limited, and within a matter of a few months, it will resolve and they'll regrow all of their hair. However, some individuals experience a chronic and progressive type of alopecia areata where that small circular patch continues to expand until most of the hair is gone, or you can experience it in different patterns. One pattern called the ophiasis type pattern causes a diffuse thinning of the hair all the way around the side, and it's one of the most aggressive forms. It's usually progressive, and it's very difficult to treat and get that hair to grow back. Another type of alopecia areata is called alopecia totalis, where an individual will lose all of the hair across their head. And then there's alopecia universalis, which affects the entire body, and hair on the head, the eyebrows, the armpits, and everywhere else falls out and can be permanently gone. Alopecia areata is autoimmune, and that means that in each of these circumstances, the body is attacking the hair follicle. For some reason, it sees it as a foreign invader, or as a threat to the body, and it just attacks all of the hair. Now, I do think it's reasonable that this may be part of Jada Pinkett Smith's problem, but I can't say for sure. She hasn't opened up about that, so we're going to continue to explore some other potential causes of alopecia. Another phenomenon is called telogen effluvium. Telogen effluvium is not autoimmune, but it is something that can happen to individuals when they go through a particularly stressful time. That may mean having surgery, a major surgery, or going through an accident that causes you to need surgery. It can be an emotional event, so losing a loved one, even sometimes loss of a job or some other major stressful event in your life. Essentially, when your body senses that you are under an intense amount of stress, whether it's psychological or physical, it goes into panic mode and prioritizes all of the bodily functions that are going to keep you alive. Like it or not, hair growth typically isn't one of those essential functions that your life depends on. And so during that time, the hair just stops growing for a little while. Our hair goes through different phases, and that's a catagen phase, an anagen phase, and then a telogen phase. Telogen is the phase under which it falls out. So most of our hairs at any one time are in what is called the anagen phase, and that's the growing phase. And then there's a period of arrest where the hair goes into catagen phase and it just kind of sits. It's not getting longer, but it's not falling out. And then there's telogen, where the hair falls out, and then the hair follicle prepares a new hair to start growing. It's pretty normal to lose about 100 hairs a day if you shampoo your hair on a daily basis. If you shampoo every third day, for example, you might notice up to 300 hairs coming out of your scalp, and that's pretty darn normal. Under telogen effluvium, you might notice shedding of 30-40% of the scalp hair when it's really severe. Now, most of the time, this lasts only a couple of months because it takes a couple of months for those hairs to cycle again and start growing. So the majority of people who experience an episode of telogen effluvium, it will be temporary and the hair will start to grow back. And by that time next year, they're going to be okay. In rare circumstances, telogen effluvium can become a chronic condition. We don't really understand quite why that happens in some people and not others, but that prominent loss just continues to happen, and you're always losing about 30% of your hair, and you can't really keep up with it, and you have diffuse thinning. Sometimes it's stable diffuse thinning, meaning you definitely look thin, but it doesn't really get any worse or any better, and sometimes it's a progressive telogen effluvium where the hair just kind of continues to fall out and the growth does not keep up with the level of loss that you're experiencing. We don't know if Jada Pinkett Smith experienced any major stressful event before she started experiencing hair loss, but oftentimes telogen effluvium can be compounded with other types of hair loss, and that's when it becomes progressive. For example, an individual may be doing really good with their hair, they have an experience of telogen effluvium, and it unmasks an episode of androgenic alopecia. So if they have a hormonal predisposition to lose hair, the telogen effluvium really kicks that off, and then they have a hard time keeping up with it. So telogen effluvium, again, very common. We see it all the time in the clinic. We've seen it in a lot of people recently following a COVID infection, and in some circumstances after the flu or other infections, and in some cases it can even happen after vaccinations and, like I said, major surgery. A form of this is also very common in women after delivery. After they have their baby, it's very common to experience massive shedding of the hair because the hair tends to get really thick during pregnancy. It grows and then a lot of it will fall out. So there's that postpartum or post-pregnancy hair loss that many women are familiar with. We've got two types of hair loss to go, so I hope you'll stick around. The next one that we're going to talk about is traction alopecia. Traction alopecia happens when somebody uses very tight hairstyles. So it can happen when they're pulling their hair very tight with ponytails or very tight weaves. And what it does is it puts traction or tension on the hair follicle. And when you're constantly pulling that hair against the follicle, it stretches, it can damage the hair follicle, and it can lead to scarring. Traction alopecia can be a permanent form of hair loss. It can actually cause those hair follicles to scar down and never recover. So if you're in the habit of having very tight hairstyles, I would encourage you to relax them a little bit. That way you're not going to be damaging the hair follicle. And this is counseling that I'll give to my patients many times if they're experiencing something that looks like traction alopecia. Oftentimes we see that happening first at the periphery of the hair up in the temples, and hopefully then at that point, if we can intervene, we can change the hairstyle, then they're going to recover. The last type of hair loss that I want to talk about is an alarming one because we're seeing this increase every year. The incidence of lichen planopilaris seems to be skyrocketing, and it's a diagnosis I feel like I'm making almost every day in the clinic. Lichen planopilaris can come in two different forms, and that's general lichen planopilaris, which can affect the entire scalp, and another form called frontal fibrosing alopecia. Frontal fibrosing alopecia tends to only affect the frontal scalp, and the hairline aggressively recedes, and somebody's forehead might start to look longer and longer. In severe cases, frontal fibrosing alopecia can also come down and start to affect the eyebrows, and in severe cases, the eyelashes. Some people will have a different syndrome where they'll also lose the hair in their armpits, maybe in their groin. Lichen planopilaris and frontal fibrosing alopecia, they look the same under the microscope, so they're grouped as a similar entity. They just occur in a different pattern. It is an autoimmune attack on the hair follicles, but when we look under the microscope after taking a biopsy, it looks different than alopecia areata. Frontal fibrosing alopecia and lichen planopilaris often have symptoms of itching or burning pain on the scalp. They do tend to be chronic and progressive, so they get worse over time. These entities are much more common in women than they are men, and we don't know if that's due to certain ingredients in cosmetic products. Some have even speculated that it could be to nano zinc or titanium in sunscreens. So those super nanoparticles, we've tried to move away from them, but it's still speculation at this point whether that has anything to do with this type of hair loss. Sunscreen remains important, you just got to find one that works for you. Because this is much more common in women than in men, and there's really no clear etiology as to why it happens in the first place, this certainly could be another entity that Jada Pinkett Smith is experiencing. Whether she's experiencing the lichen planopilaris that has affected her whole scalp diffusely, or she's experienced frontal fibrosing alopecia where the scalp started to recede, I can't say. Again, just looking at the video that we've seen of her, it's hard to say what type of hair loss she may be experiencing. Regardless of the type of hair loss that she's experiencing or that anyone else listening or watching may be experiencing, alopecia in all of its forms can be very distressing. Oftentimes our hair is a part of our identity. It helps make us who we are, and when we look in the mirror every day, we're used to seeing a certain image, and that's how we present ourselves to the world. So when individuals start to lose their hair, it comes along with a high risk for anxiety or depression or other self-image problems. Now, I believe that Will Smith overreacted to a distasteful joke, but we can see that even though Jada Pinkett Smith talks about having a high comfort level with her appearance at this time, I'm sure that didn't come easily. There probably was lots of time together with her husband Will, maybe, in distress or crying or whatever it was, but you could tell that deeply inside and emotionally she didn't react well to that joke, and whatever had gone on behind the scenes, Will knew that pain was there, and that's part of why he reacted the way that he did, whether it was right or wrong. I personally think it was wrong. If you happen to suffer from any of these forms of alopecia, I highly recommend that you see a board-certified dermatologist for early intervention. The earlier that we can stop hair loss, the more successful we can be in treating it and helping you to regrow hair. I'm also going to include some resources in the show notes so that if you're suffering from alopecia areata or one of these other types of hair loss, there's societies and support groups that you can look for that will help you to navigate that, help you to find doctors, help you to get second opinions, or just to get ideas from other people what may have worked for them. So in conclusion, alopecia, regardless of the type it is, can be really distressing, and individuals need to be respected and supported on their journey. It's really, in my opinion, always wrong to make fun of somebody's appearance, and I think that under any other circumstance, a joke like that would obviously be considered bullying. So go out of your way to be kind to somebody and provide support whenever somebody might be struggling. Thanks for watching. I hope this was educational and entertaining for you. Please leave me a comment. Let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you back next time.